Welcome into the PFN Bengals podcast. I am Dallas Robinson. He is Jay Morrison. Jay, we got mass hysteria at Bengals OTAs yesterday. You were on site. Joe Burrow was not on the field, and it created a firestorm on Twitter. I'll tell you that much. I don't know how much of that you were able to catch when you're on site there on the field, but sitting at home watching Twitter kind of go crazy as Joe Burrow is nowhere to be found. It was a very interesting Tuesday. I'll say that much. Jay, how was your day going? How did OTAs go? Give us kind of the story from yesterday's session.
Yeah, so it was one of those deals where when they told us that Joe would not be at practice and that Zach would address it after practice, I sent the tweet out, and then I never looked at Twitter the rest of practice because I knew what was happening. I would say I put my phone in my pocket and forgot about it, but I didn't, because then I wrote a very quick story with talk to text on my phone and sent that into our newsroom, and they got it up right away. I don't blame people for thinking the worst. Number one, three reasons really. Number one, Joe Burrow's been through a lot. Number two, this is a injury that's unprecedented. So you're always wondering, could there be setbacks? What's the timeline? All that, what the timeline look like? And then the third one, it's the Bengals' own damn fault. Well, I mean, right. Number one, why rest him on a day when the media is there, which Zach said that was totally his fault. He just messed up the schedule. But the other thing is, why not just tell us that it's a scheduled day off instead of saying we'll address it after practice in an hour and a half? That gives 90 minutes. 90 minutes on Twitter, a lot can happen. And it did, I guess. I guess people went nuts, and I get it. You are always wondering when it comes to Joe Burrow, everything is a big deal. It doesn't sound like this actually is. And I am curious because Zach did say he would practice today. So obviously, as we're recording this, practice started 7 minutes ago. The media is not allowed to be at practice today. Fans are, if you want to go on the bridge that overlooks the practice field. So I wonder how many people are up there to see if Joe's really there. And I will caution that if the Bengals move practice inside the bubble, it's probably not because they're trying to hide a Joe Burrow absence. It's because we're expecting storms here in Cincinnati very soon. And it could just be weather related if they go inside the bubble. Next week, if you're thinking about going and watching minicamp from the bridge, don't do that. All three practices are scheduled to be inside the indoor facility. But yeah, I mean, anything with Burrow is gonna ripple. And then when you put off saying what it is for 90 minutes, it just opens Pandora's box for people to speculate and expect the worst, fear the worst. I'm sure it was mass panic amongst the fan base, but fortunately for all the people that follow the Bengals, it doesn't sound like it was. It was just a planned day off, which makes sense. They said they were going to do it. He said he was going to take days off. The one thing I will say that was curious, because Zach said that they've given him the second day off each week. And last week, day one was Tuesday because they didn't practice on Memorial Day. Day two was Wednesday. And on Wednesday, May 29th, there is a post from the Bengals social media account of Joe Burrow throwing, and it says OTAs day 2. So he didn't take the second day off last week. So I don't know if the holiday just messed up Zach's calendar or what, or if they are hiding a little something. I don't know. It's just, I don't want to say it's no big deal yet, because we'll see. I mean, maybe when we get into training camp and an issue arises and we say, that was the start of it. But I also think more than likely, it didn't seem like there was any pressure, worry, anything. The players were in a light mood after practice. It didn't seem like there was any kind of heavy pall cast over the team, which you would think would be the case if they found out something really bad about Joe Burrow.
Yeah, I mean, it's an unforced error, I think, from the Bengals to kind of create this hysteria, right? When they could have kind of averted all that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we knew Joe Burrow was going to take some time off during these practice sessions, but we didn't know the exact plan, right? The exact kind of regiment, the exact schedule that the Bengals and Joe Burrow have obviously talked about and put some time into thinking on. How are we going to give our star quarterback, who's coming off an injury, a little bit of a break here and there? Well, we didn't know that. So the Bengals might have thought, okay, well, this is just his usual rest day. Well, the rest of us weren't really aware of that schedule until it came out via this kind of scheduling mistake that Zach Taylor talked about. Zach Taylor also talked about the fact that Joe Burrow, if he had his druthers, he'd be out there every day, right? Yeah. That as a head coach, that it's Zach Taylor's job to kind of say, hey, you're coming off a relatively serious injury here. Let's give it a little bit. Let's give you a little time to recover. You are the franchise. We need you here. Let's give you a little bit of a break. The fact that he's saying Joe Burrow wants to be out there every day does give you a little bit of confidence that they're not trying to hide something, that Joe Burrow would be out there practicing every day if it's the regular season. But yeah, there's a little bit of me that like wants to turn us into Woodward and Bernstein here and try to figure out, is there a conspiracy going on? Like, what are the Bengals hiding? Like this whole day 2 thing that you mentioned from Twitter, like what's the real truth? I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe we will get into training camp and we'll point back to this day and this episode as saying we should have known, right? We should have known this was the ground zero of what's going on with Burrow. That would strike me as unlikely. I think that it's probably what Zach Taylor said, that it's probably a genuine mistake, that yes, they're being cautious with Joe Burrow as they should coming off this injury, but it sounds like they have a plan in place. It sounds like Joe Burrow's on board with that plan, even if he really doesn't want to be, that they've got a procedure in place to make sure he can get through this summer and have as normal of a training camp as he could, right? If finally having somewhat normal training camp going into this 2024 season.
Yeah. And the other thing that is curious is, you know, his car was there when I got to the stadium. And then when this happened, when they said Zach would talk after practice, I went back into the media room to get my recorder because I wasn't expecting to do interviews on the field after practice, and his car was gone. And guys take rest days all the time, and they still come out to practice. I mean, why didn't Joe just come out and watch practice in sweats? And then, I mean, maybe it's because they don't do a whole lot. Again, it was like 10 or 11 plays of 7-on-7. How much is he really going to glean by watching position drills if he's not actually going to participate? So maybe that's part of it. But he is one of those guys that always wants to be a part. When he was out last year with the calf, there was still times that he was at practice and watching. And again, it was training camp and more was going on. It did make some sense, but the good news is he was there. He was in on meetings yesterday. He was there for the important mental part of it. Maybe they just said, go home. You know, it's not just a physical rest day. It's a mental rest day as well. And we'll see. We'll be anxiously watching the Bengals Twitter account today. I'm sure they will have some sort of he's back. I mean, maybe they won't. I mean, it would make sense to make fun or poke fun at the panic that it caused, but because they caused it themselves, maybe they won't poke fun out of it. But every day they post photos and videos from practice. And if he's practicing today, I'm sure we'll see it on social media. Yeah,
to get another Watergate reference and maybe our long national nightmare is over type tweet or something like that for Burrow's return. I don't know. So next week, the Bengals are doing a mandatory mini camp. Zach Taylor said the plan is for Joe Burrow to participate in all 3 days. You asked Zach Taylor that question, Jay. Now, he did caution it by saying, you know, we'll see what happens on that third day of minicamp, kind of suggesting that there may not be a third day of minicamp, that maybe he'll send everybody home. But it sounds like the plan is for Zach Taylor to participate next week when the Bengals do their mandatory minicamp.
Yeah, Joe. He said he would throw today, and then certainly next week he will. They are expecting him to throw at minicamp. That again, it's in the bubble, so nobody go to the bridge next week.
Other news from OTAs: Trent Brown's still not there. Again, this is all voluntary, so I don't think there's any totally reason to be concerned about that. I mean, this is a guy that's had injury issues and some other stuff, but If long as he's at mandatory minicamp, I think the Bengals are probably fine with that. Defensive tackle Sheldon Rankins, another free agent signing. He talked about he wanted to get just a couple days with the team, kind of ingratiate himself with the teammates, learn the system, just get a little bit of, I guess, put his foot in the water a little bit before minicamp starts, right? Get a little bit of action there. This is a guy who knows his routine, knows his offseason routine. He's been in the NFL for a long time. Bengals probably aren't too concerned that he wasn't there, but it's nice to see him come in for these few days. And Zach Taylor talked about that too, that it's nice to see a veteran come in, especially when he can help mentor guys like Roman or like Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson and work with those other defensive tackles. I think it's good to see Sheldon Rankins come in, just at least for these few days of practice. Yeah, and he talked. I mean, I asked him. I missed his initial scrum because I was writing the reaction to what Zach had said, and then I wanted to go talk to Josh Newton about his video where he just blew up Chad Johnson, and so I missed Sheldon with the big scrum when he dropped the Super Bowl or bust comment, but I did catch up with them later, and he talked about that. Yeah, what Zach was
said was true, where we have the playbook, we know it, we're studying it, we're very comfortable with it. But he said it's totally 100% different to be in the huddle and hear the call and get lined up and get the spacing proper with the guy that's next to you, and then understand the checks and what comes next. He said that's a huge difference. And so it was important for him to be there this week to get that part of it started ahead of the mini camp next week. And then especially so he feels like he can hit the ground running and be the guy he knows he is the way he put it, when training camp starts. And, Trent Brown, I would think if you're coming to a new team, that would be a priority. Maybe not the whole offseason, but get here before the mandatory part, especially if that team drafted a guy at your position in the first round and there's a training camp battle coming. So I don't think Trent Brown, forget what it means for the Bengals, I don't think he's doing himself any favors by not being here for this portion of the offseason.
It's so funny because you hear Zach Taylor talk about when Trent Brown and Sheldon Rankins are not there, and it's it's okay, they're getting the routine and they know their work. But then when Sheldon Rankins shows up, Zach Taylor's ecstatic that he's there, right? So right. It clearly does mean something. And you're right. I mean, I think Trent Brown is a guy who, like I said, has dealt with injuries and other stuff beyond that. I mean, there was time last year with the Patriots where he was just missing time because he had some off-field stuff. He had some personal stuff. I'm not saying he has to be there because he has this baggage, but you're right. The Bengals drafted his long-term replacement, I guess you could say, in Amarius Mims. Trent Brown does not have that right tackle job on lockdown, I wouldn't think. I mean, Amarius Mims will have a chance to start. Trent Brown is going to be a good swing tackle at the very least. But yeah, I think from his perspective, it is surprising that he's not here. Sheldon Rankins, I think, is a guy too who's been on so many teams. I mean, the Bengals are his fourth team. I think he kind of is accustomed to joining a new team and learning that new terminology as well. So at least he's got that kind of advantage of he's been through this before as a multi-time free agent.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting next week when whatever reps they do, whether it's even position drills, they do it by first team, second team. They put five guys up there on the sled, and the next five do they put Mims ahead of Trent Brown because Mims has been here and Trent Brown hasn't, or do they put Brown ahead of Mims because he's the veteran and making more money and all of that? I'm really interested to see how that's going to play out.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how they organize that. Last thing from OTAs, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins still absent. Yeah. No surprise. T. Higgins are not expecting till much later this year. Jamar Chase, we're probably expecting. I mean, we are expecting next week. He's under contract. It's mandatory unless he wants to accept some fines, which we're not thinking. He will be at mandatory minicamp next week. Yeah. The big thing we want to talk about with Jamar Chase, of course, is the fallout from the Justin Jefferson extension. Justin Jefferson finally gets his big deal from the Minnesota Vikings. 4 years, $140 million, $35 million per year. He's now the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL. $110 million guaranteed for injury, $88.7 million fully guaranteed. This is obviously going to have some impacts on Jamar Chase, his former LSU teammate, two of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Big picture thoughts here, Jay, on what this Justin Jefferson extension means. The situations are different, right? The Vikings are on a rookie quarterback timeline now with J.J. McCarthy. They're not paying a quarterback $55 million like the Bengals are. But there's obvious parallels here. What are your thoughts on how this big deal that truly did reset this market here at wide receiver, how does this what's the fallout going to be for Jamar Chase and the Bengals?
Yeah, I think it's good news for both of them. The Bengals knew they were going to have to pay Jamar Chase, and by this going so far above and beyond, like Jamar Chase is the only guy in the league that can even stake a claim to being worth that much money. It's not like a lot of these contracts, it's just leapfrog and one after another. They just keep topping each other. I think unless it's Jamar Chase, I think it's going to be a long time before anybody tops that contract, at least among wide receivers. Maybe an edge rusher will here or there. Obviously quarterbacks will, but as far as non-quarterbacks, it kind of just freezes the market. It doesn't just reset it. It totally froze it, at least for a season or two. So that gives Jamar time to I mean, he could go in right now and say, I want a little bit more and play the leapfrog game. I'm not sure he would get it, So just wait until I see what he does this season. And he could blow up and have a massive year this year. And then he can justify saying, I want 10% more. And it gives the Bengals time too. I don't think they're in any hurry. They would, if they're going to give him a bunch of guaranteed money, and I don't know if it's going to get to the 89 at signing, 110 million for the whole deal. Yep. I don't know if they're going to get to that, but they're going to have to give him a lot of guaranteed money. So this just kind of kicks that can down the road a little bit longer. I'd be stunned if anything got done before the start of this season. It's going to be somewhere in 2025 when the Bengals and Ja'Marr get that extension. Will it be March? Will it be right before the draft? Will it be right before training camp, or will it be on Thursday night of the kickoff game like the Joe Burrow one was? I don't know, but at some point in 2025, we're going to see Ja'Marr Chase locked up long term. Not long term, but he's going to get extended.
I mean, I'm looking back at some of the comments that Ja'Marr Chase made earlier this year and at some of your articles that, was he going to wait till Justin Jefferson? Hell yeah, I'm going to wait till Justin Jefferson. And then he said, what do you want on your contract? Probably just upfront money for real. Mm-hmm. Oh, what about guaranteed money in year two? You're going a little too far now. I gave you a little spice. Don't take all of it. I love that. He's not trying to give away his whole negotiation strategy here, but yeah. I think it is very interesting. I agree with you. I think that in some ways this does set a cap on the wide receiver market that is going to be hard to beat, right? Because I think on paper you can say, okay, the wide receiver market was at 30 or 32 or something like that. Justin Jefferson got up to 35, not that big of an increase. But if you pull back the layers a little bit, the top of the wide receiver market was not really that high because guys like Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, their contracts had these huge base salaries and cap numbers at the end that artificially inflated their AAV, right? Mm-hmm. So their contracts were not really that high. A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, they just got extended, but they already had existing years on their contracts. They baked all that in. These big AAVs that we're seeing are kind of fake. The real top of the market going into the Jefferson talks was like 28 million or something. Yeah. To go from 28 to 35 is a massive, massive jump, absolutely huge to reset a market like that. In my opinion, when that happens, I think it's hard to clear that. You saw that at like defensive tackle with Aaron Donald, when Aaron Donald just blew out the rest of the market. I think it was like 31 plus million at defensive tackle. For a long time, nobody else at any position on defense came close to that. I really do think this Jefferson contract has a chance to be like that, where you're just not getting above that, whether it's Ja'Marr Chase. The only other guy I would say that has any chance to come near this is CeeDee Lamb. And even him, I don't think just statistically is not going to be able to get there. I just wonder if this sets a cap in terms of you're not getting past Justin Jefferson. He's had the greatest start to a career for any wide receiver in NFL history. He's got multiple All-Pros. He's got an offensive player of the year award on his ledger. You're not going to get past this. Like you said, Jay, if the contract wants to get done now. If we wait till next offseason and Ja'Marr Chase goes out and wins Offensive Player of the Year, who says he can't, then you talk about, okay, now Ja'Marr Chase has maybe got that championship belt as the league's best wide receiver. Now he can get to $37 million. But if the deal gets done before this offseason, I just don't see there's a way he gets above Jefferson.
No, not this offseason. But next year, yeah. And I mean, I think he will, regardless of the year he has in AAV. And I think that's where the trade-off's going to be is I don't know that the Bengals are going to go 110 in guaranteed. And maybe that's the trade-off that, hey, we'll make you the highest paid receiver in the league by AAV, but it won't be that much guaranteed money. And they'll argue, you look at their history, rarely do they cut guys before the final year of their deal. They usually let them play them out, even though it's not guaranteed. It's trust us, you'll get that money, and that's hard to do for a player and an agent, I know. But I think he'll top Justin Jefferson in terms of AAV at least. And then if he does have a great year, I think he could put up that argument that he wants that kind of guaranteed money. And then we see how contentious does the negotiations get. And I mean, the Bengals, they can't let him get away. And then they'll have him for another year anyhow on the 5th year option. So it's not like it has to get done next offseason, but they want it to. They don't want it to go into 2026 and then they're having to come up with the decision of whether to franchise tag him or extend him at that point. That's when it could get really ugly.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but is that the strategy the Bengals took with AJ Green? It's been so long when they extended him. I want to say that they made AJ Green the highest played wide receiver by AAV when they extended him in like 2014, 2015. But the guarantees were not. It's the same kind of thing you're talking about. We'll give you a high AAV. We'll make you the highest paid wide receiver. But if you look under the hood at the guarantees, it's probably not going to be there. You look at Justin Jefferson's contract, the AAV is obviously impressive, but the cash flow numbers I think are just as impressive.
Yeah.
It blows out the other wide receiver deals completely out of the water. It's very much in line with the Nick Bosa contract that the defensive end from the 49ers received, I believe, last year, that made him at the time the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL. Mm-hmm. It's clear the Vikings were working off that deal. I think when you look at these cash flow numbers and what Jefferson is going to make, and right now, year one, year two of the deal, it's like the Vikings weren't even considering these other wide receiver contracts. They were saying, no, you're one of the best players in the NFL who doesn't play the premium position like quarterback, and we're going to pay you as such, and we're going to give you the cash flow as such, and that's what they did.
They had the luxury too, because they got rid of Kirk Cousins, and so now you got JJ McCarthy on a rookie deal, so you don't have anybody else to pay, so you're able to just break the bank and give it all to Justin Jefferson.
Exactly. It's a great point. I did want to pull up these stats from Pro Football Reference. So this is Jamar Chase versus CeeDee Lamb versus Justin Jefferson. As you can see, I mean, this is the past 3 years. So CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson have an extra year before Jamar Chase came into the league, but over the past 3 years, CeeDee Lamb actually leads in most of these categories. Now, a lot of that's health related, that CeeDee Lamb has just been healthier than Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. Mm-hmm. Jamar Chase obviously had the injury a couple of years ago. Justin Jefferson had the injury last year and missed time. But CeeDee Lamb has honestly like the best numbers from a reception point of view. From a reception yardage, Justin Jefferson leads. And then in touchdowns, Jamar Chase leads despite missing all that extra time. The numbers are pretty comparable, but I think if you're looking at this and you see how these three players stack up, it's going to be a hard argument to say that Jamar Chase right now is a better player or has produced more than Justin Jefferson, to the point where I think it's going to take another season. Like look at how the awards stack up. If Jamar Chase can win an Offensive Player of the Year award next year, if he can even finish second or third, I think that would boost his kind of negotiating power. If he can make another first team All-Pro, that's where he trails as kind of in these awards here past Justin Jefferson. I think if he can get in that mix and really get in that postseason award conversation, that's only going to further bolster his argument to top Jefferson. But right now, I think that he is stuck behind that $35 million a year number. And I'd just be surprised if it gets above that anytime soon, at least.
I think he does get over the $35 million, and then they make the concession with the guaranteed money. And the other thing is, how much is the cap going to go up next year? I mean, the Bengals are going to have more flexibility to throw more money his way. And so and it's just kind of the nature of it. You see it all the time where it's whoever signs last. It doesn't necessarily mean you're the best player. It's just, they just keep kind of stair stepping each other and leapfrogging each other. And he maybe doesn't have the numbers to warrant that, but if he signs a year after Justin Jefferson and his 4-year numbers look about the same as what Justin Jefferson's look, I don't know if he can even get there. If he'd have to have like 2,000 yards this year to get to where Justin Jefferson is, but he doesn't have to have Jefferson numbers to get Jefferson AAV, and that's why I think he is gonna get me. I mean, maybe it's 35.1 million. He's not gonna blow him away and get to 40 necessarily, but I think they will give him that ability to say, I'm the highest paid receiver in the league.
Justin Jefferson's contract, at least on percent of the cap, is the fourth highest wide receiver contract in history. Number one is still Tyreek Hill as a percent of the salary cap. Now, that is still based on that $30 million number that we talked about earlier. That's maybe not real, but Jerry Rice's 1996 contract with the 49ers comes in second. DeAndre Hopkins with the Cardinals in 2020 is third. And then Justin Jefferson is actually tied for third with DeAndre Hopkins, 13.7% of the salary cap. So either way, I think this is where Jamar Chase is going to end up, right? Directionally, this is where Jamar Chase is going to end up. Whether it's a few more dollars here or there on either side remains to be seen. But this sets the baseline. And I think that we know the Bengals are talking with Jamar Chase, and we think it'll get done at some point. I do feel a little bit bad for T. Higgins. It's hard to feel bad for someone who's going to make $21 million to play a sport next year, but it's difficult when you're talking about these massive numbers for your teammate who plays the same position. And it's like it's a matter of if not when that the Bengals are going to extend Chase, whereas Higgins is just kind of still sitting out there and not knowing what his future looks like. There's a little bit of twinge of I feel bad for T. Higgins given all this talk about Jamar Chase.
Yeah, well, and that's another reason I don't think Chase gets done this offseason, because T's sitting there with his hand out, and not only are they not paying him, but they're going to give Jamar make him the highest paid receiver in the league. Right. It just creates a weird dynamic. And I don't think T would be a divisive force, but it creates a weird dynamic. And I remember a couple of years ago when they had to decide between Larry Ogunjobi and BJ Hill, and Larry Ogunjobi signed that huge deal with the Chicago Bears. And so the Bengals signed BJ Hill, and then Larry doesn't pass his physical. Right. And I had asked some people in the organization, well, would you bring him back on get him back on a cheap? And they're like, no, you just can't do that. That creates a very not ideal dynamic within that room where they were both in line to get huge paydays, and now one guy's making way more than the other. It's like you just kind of have to let that play out. So that's another reason I'd be surprised if they did anything with Chase this offseason.
That's a really good point. You see that too with guys that are asked to take pay cuts, and they don't want to take a pay cut because they don't want to have to go back into the locker room knowing they're taking less money. They're willing to pay for whatever that reduced rate might be, but it's going to be for another team if they're going to have to take that pay cut. It's just a reminder that there are all these internal kind of dynamics, that these guys are humans too, right? That yes, it's a lot of money, and yes, it's a game, but there's a lot of internal dynamics, I think, that are at play that we have to consider, especially pride, especially when we're talking about money. I mean, that's just how it is in the NFL. It's how it is in any business, really. Okay, that's how things are kind of in present day Bengals land. Let's turn the page and go back into the past a little bit. Jay, you've been working on a lot of lists this summer, Bengals related lists. You're ranking a lot of things. I am too. We all are at PFN. It's the dead time of the NFL calendar. There's not a ton going on besides OTAs and guys throwing against air, right? So it's time to look back and do some rankings. Jay, let's take a look at your rankings. So far, you have done the best Bengals QBs in history, the best Bengals wide receivers in history. You've got best Bengals running backs coming at some point. You've got best Bengals head coaches coming at some point. We'll talk about that here in 1 second, but I did want to get into your top quarterbacks list. So for those of you who are watching on YouTube, I'm going to just pull up the article that Jay wrote here with the best Bengals quarterbacks of all time. And that here. So Jay, you've got at number 1, a spoiler alert for anybody who has not read the article yet, you've got Mr. Ken Anderson. I've got no problem with that. I think that he is the most accomplished quarterback in Bengals history by far. I have no issue with that. For me, I'm not trying to give you any crap here, but if it were me, if I were doing this list, did you give any thought? You've got Andy Dalton at number 5. You've got Joe Burrow at number 3. You've got Carson Palmer at number 4. Did you give any thought to putting Andy Dalton a little higher? Now, I know he's talent-wise, he's not at Carson Palmer's level, he's not at Joe Burrow's level, but in terms of what he accomplished, it's hard for me to put him behind Carson Palmer. I might have had him a little higher than you did, Jay. Give me your thinking on how you rank these quarterbacks.
I spent way too much time debating the Carson Andy. That was the hardest position there. I never considered putting either one ahead of Joe. If Joe never plays another game in his career, he's still number 3. Neither Andy and Carson never took him to a Super Bowl, never won 5 playoff games. So never won any playoff games. So that, I mean, for me, it was looking at Andy and Carson, the numbers are pretty similar. It was a lot of back and forth. And I thought, if you asked NFL GMs after the fact, what their careers are, who would you pick? And I think people go with Carson Palmer. I just think he was more gifted, maybe didn't get as much out of it, but out of his talent. But the other thing and I pointed out in the article is that Carson didn't have a lot of good defenses. And Andy had some really good defenses. And that's a big reason why they went to those playoffs. And Carson came as they were still kind of trying to build the Marvin Lewis era and get that foundation set. And Andy, he didn't step into an ideal situation with Carson walking away. And that 2010 team was awful. And it was a huge surprise what Andy did in his rookie year. But I just, from the physical tools to what I mentioned about having better people around him, I mean, they both had elite wide receivers, but it was close. It could have been 4A and 4B, but I felt like if you asked most people, would you rather have Carson Palmer or Andy Dalton, knowing what their careers were, it might not be unanimous, but more often than not, people would take Carson Palmer.
No, I agree. And it goes back to like what your criteria are for ranking the list. Carson Palmer, I think, was definitely the more gifted, more talented player. You could argue that Andy Dalton accomplished more, but how much of that was really because of him, right? Andy Dalton was always kind of viewed as a quarterback who you could win with, not because of a quarterback you'd win because of. You mentioned that Andy Dalton had great weapons. For the most part, had a really good offensive line. He had offensive coordinators that went on to become head coaches. He had guys calling the defense that went on to become head coaches, and excellent talent on that side of the ball. He had a lot more advantages than Carson Palmer did during his time. And Carson Palmer, I think, is very much akin to Marvin Lewis in that he kind of helped get the Bengals to where they are now. Mm-hmm. But I think Andy Dalton probably accomplished a little more, but how much of that was just because of his environment around him? I think it's a great argument to have. It's a great debate to have. Joe Burrow, you've got here at number 3. I agree that he's got to be number 3, and Boomer Esiason at number 2. I feel like it's the top 3. I don't think there's anything to argue with. I feel like it's pretty set in stone. The question is how far Joe Burrow can rise, right?
Yeah.
if he goes out and wins a Super Bowl this year, I mean, do you put Joe Burrow at number 1? Is that enough for him to go to number 1? I would think so. I mean, it's a short career, but the question is just now how far up this list can he rise? And I think the ceiling is probably unlimited.
Yeah, I think he's won in short order. I did a radio interview yesterday, and they asked me that, what does Joe Burrow have to do to get number 1 on the list? And I said, keep breathing, stay alive. Yeah. If he just has what he's averaged his first few years, he's going to be there in short order, whether he wins a Super Bowl or not. I mean, nobody else on that list won a Super Bowl. So, Ken Anderson and Boomer both won NFL MVPs. I don't know that Joe needs to even do that to get to number 1 on this list. Just what he's done in this short time. If he continues to put up similar numbers for another 2-3 years, if I rank him again after 2025, 2027, whatever it is, I think he could be there. He should be there.
All right, so we'll save running backs because that article has not been published yet, but we are going to show best wide receivers. Now, the Bengals wide receiver history, I mean, do they have the best? So it's got to be some of the best wide receiver history in NFL history, right? I have to go through all the different teams and see what wide receivers have been on which clubs, but good God, the Bengals have had a lot of talented pass catchers. I can't imagine this list was easy to do. This one, you went down to 10 players. I imagine this was pretty difficult to assemble this list, Jay, given the level of talent the Bengals have had at this position. Yeah,
the 2 hardest spots were T. Higgins and Tim McGee at 10. And then a lot of people don't like Carl Pickens at 3. And I think it kind of goes to the Carson Palmer, Andy Dalton argument too, where people look at the personality conflicts and maybe forget how good the player was. And, Carl Pickens' time didn't end well in Cincinnati. Carson certainly didn't. I felt like Jamar 4 was good. And I know people have taken exception with Carl being over Jamar, but I mean, Jamar's played 3 seasons. Like by week 5 this year, I might put him ahead of, but I just need to see a little bit more. That is if Jamar Chase never plays another game for the Bengals. That's where I would have him slotted, which I think 4 on the all-time list among these receivers after just 3 seasons. I think that's fair to have him at 4. Carl Pickens, he never played with a good quarterback. Jeff Blake had some moments, but those were bad teams in the 90s, and he was the offense. And, Isaac Curtis, I'm a huge Isaac Curtis fan. The first game I ever attended was in 1976. So my dad had season tickets. I saw almost all of his home games, watched all of the road games on TV. I'm very familiar with Isaac Curtis. And me putting Carl ahead of Isaac is not based on total numbers. I didn't want to do that. It's different eras. You can't do that. And what I did is I looked to see where they ranked amongst their peers each season in catches. receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. And I was stunned how few times Isaac Curtis ranked in the top 10 in any of those. I mean, he was way down, not just not in the top 10. I'll get the numbers here real quick. His average for his career was 37th in the league in receiving yards, 56th each year in receptions, and 46th in receiving touchdowns. I mean, Carl Pickens alone in 94, 95, and 96, he was in the top 10 7 times. I mean, when you look at it that way, where he was among the best at his position consistently, and the one that almost makes it like a no-brainer, you would think. But the one thing that I kept coming back to with Isaac is do I put Isaac ahead of Carl Pickens is he was explosive in an era where there wasn't a lot of explosion, and he was a real game changer. And Carl Pickens, yeah, he had some big moments, but a lot of those were just kind of bad quarterbacks throwing jump balls, and he was so good at going up and getting them. Yeah. So it made for a really, really tough decision. And I hope the Isaac Curtis fan, I just want Isaac Curtis fans to know that I'm as old school as it gets. I'm probably older than a lot of people reading that article, and I have great respect for Isaac Curtis, but just looking at where he was slotted against the guys he played against in that era, I had to go with Carl Pickens ahead of him.
Yeah, I mean, incredible start to Isaac Curtis's career. 3 second-team All-Pros within his first 4 seasons. Led the league with 21.2 yards per reception in his 3rd season. Went over 21 yards per reception twice in his first 3 years. But I think it's an important point you make about comparing eras, and that's how you have to do it, because the numbers back in the 70s, it's just not going to compare to numbers in the 80s, numbers in the 90s. Certainly not numbers from today. So looking at it in terms of how they compare to the rest of the league is the way to do it. That's how I've been doing it too, Jay, going through my kind of rankings and my list of these players. It is difficult to look through those eras. Pro Football Reference, I think, does a great job with quarterbacks and doing indexed stats where you can kind of see, based off a baseline of 100 and above or below, and see how guys compares. But with other positions, it can be difficult to do that. Even guys like wide receivers who have actual statistics, it's hard to compare those between eras. So I think that makes a lot of sense to look at how they factor in and how they rate against the rest of the competition they were facing at the time. At number 1, you've got Chad Johnson / Chad Ochocinco. I don't know if anyone saw, so Chad actually responded on Twitter and said he thinks AJ Green is the top receiver in Bengals history.
No, he said Jamar.
Oh, he said Jamar? I thought he said AJ Green.
No,
I completely read that wrong. Okay, yeah, I thought he said AJ Green.
Yeah, it was because I don't think AJ Green has a Twitter account. He tagged Jamar and said he thought he was, because Jamar's got that weird handle, that like JA, which kind of looks like AJ. But he said it was Jamar, and I was like,
I misread that.
It will be in short order, but.
Either way, Chad Johnson is asking for a column on Pro Football Network, I think, to put his list out there. I mean, if he wants it, I think he could probably.
We'll give him a platform
if he wants to. He can do that. So, Jay, I think your next list you're working on is the top 5 head coaches in Bengals history.
It's hard.
I mean, it's hard. We were talking about it before the show. It's incredibly hard because all the names that I think you'd put at the top 5 are pretty obvious, easy, right? You've got. Yeah, Zach Taylor, you've got Marvin Lewis, you've got Forrest Gregg, Sam Weish, Paul Brown. I mean, those are the 5. It seems pretty obvious. How you order them, really not obvious at all. I mean, I'm looking at this list right now. I still don't know exactly how I'd put them. Jay, I think you're kind of still working through it in your mind, and it's understandable because none of these coaches won a Super Bowl. Some coaches have been to a Super Bowl, but nobody won one. Some of these coaches have had a couple winning seasons and gone to the playoffs, but there's not any of these coaches that truly stands above any of the rest. Now, we talked about it with Joe Burrow. Maybe Zach Taylor can get there someday. If Zach Taylor takes his team to another Super Bowl next year, if he wins the Super Bowl next year, he'll quickly rise that list. But right now, I think you've kind of got this mix of these 5 coaches who are generally all in the same area. Pretty subjective, I think, to determine to the user or the reader or the writer in this case, who is number 1 and who's number 5.
Yeah, people are going to be mad no matter what. I mean, this article is supposed to run tomorrow, and I still haven't put them in order yet. I am struggling with it because it's like you would think Paul Brown's a no-brainer. He's one of the greatest minds in the history of football, founder of the team. But, a lot of his credentials for the Pro Football Hall of Fame were already set in stone before he even got to Cincinnati. He never won a playoff game. He had 4 winning seasons in 8 years. But yeah, you start a franchise. He took them to the playoffs in their 3rd year of existence. That's big. Marvin has more than twice as many wins as anybody else, but 0-7 in the playoffs. And what he did in rebuilding this franchise is almost as impressive as what Paul Brown did to start it. That's the shape they were in when Marvin showed up. But 0-7 in the playoffs is I don't even know how. I like the one thing I'm sure of is Zach needs to be ahead of Marvin to have 5 playoff wins. Zach has 5 playoff wins and 2 conference championship game appearances in his first 5 seasons as coach. In the 56 years before, or in the 51 years before that of the franchise, there were only 5 playoff wins and 2 conference championships appearances. So, and even if you say, oh, he's been carried by Joe Burrow, just look at what they did last year where they stayed relevant. They won games when Joe Burrow went out and Jake Browning played. And so I think Zach gets a lot of credit. Sam, innovator, just no huddle, all that, but kind of inconsistent too. Great. Yeah. Forrest Gregg was only here 4 years. Took him to the Super Bowl in his second. They were last place his first year here, Super Bowl the next year. There's just pros and cons to all these guys. It's going to be really hard. I tried to write it yesterday. I was like, nope, I need to sleep on it. I need to think some more about it. And here I am midday on Wednesday still trying to figure out what order to put these guys in. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of blowback, whatever the order is. But that's kind of the reason we do these lists. You want the engagement. Right. You want to get people talking about it.
It's tough because it's same thing you talk about with talking about guys for the Hall of Fame, right? You have to balance the longevity versus the peak too, I think. And Forrest Gregg, I think, is example number 1. 4 seasons, but he went to a Super Bowl and he went to another playoff appearance in 4 seasons. Marvin Lewis has the best longevity, the best overall track record, but you mentioned it. How can you look past 0-7 in the playoffs? If you could somehow combine a couple of these coaches like Marvin Lewis and Forrest Gregg and combine their results, I mean, that would kind of be the perfect number 1 candidate here. But without that, it's tough to do. You said it with Paul Brown. It's like, okay, this guy is, in the Mount Rushmore of NFL history. How is he not number 1? But his results as the Bengals coach were a little more inconsistent than you might think. And I do think Zach Taylor will eventually rise this list. I don't know where you're going to have Zach Taylor. I think I would put him 4th maybe, and maybe put Forrest Gregg last. But yeah, I don't know. Your argument about putting Zach Taylor above Marvin Lewis is kind of convincing me already, just based on that playoff success. It's very, very tough. If the Bengals go out and do what I think they'll do this year, I mean, I think Zach Taylor could end up number 1. I mean, I don't necessarily think he has to go out and win the Super Bowl to get there, but an 11, 12 win season and another deep playoff run, I think you'd have to probably have Zach Taylor pretty high if the Bengals are able to capitalize this season and really increase his resume after 2024. I think you'd see Zach Taylor even higher than maybe where you have him now.
I think what I'm going to do is ask for another day before it runs. And what I want to do is, because it's going to take some time to do this, and what I want to do is I want to go through and I want to look at each guy's head-to-head record against other Hall of Fame coaches or Hall of Fame locks, because like Belichick's not in, Andy Reid's not in, but Zach Taylor's got a winning record against both those guys.
True.
And so I want to see what Paul Brown did against Chuck Noll and against Tom Landry. And I think if that might be a good tiebreaker that way. But I still don't know. I almost, it feels sacrilegious not to have PB number 1. I think I have to go with that. Yeah. But the other 4, it's hard. It's going to be a long Wednesday for Jay Morrison.
It's tough. And I do think one more point is you made a good point about, I do think last year's work with Jake Browning should have improve Zach Taylor's reputation on this list and around the league too, right? We talked about that last year, that the view is that Zach Taylor, I think around the league, is carried by Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and this good offense. To see what he and Brian Callahan obviously did with Jake Browning, a guy who did not look like anywhere near an NFL caliber starter in the preseason, to see what he was able to accomplish with Jake Browning, I think has to give you a little more confidence in what Zach Taylor is as a coach and a play caller.
Yeah, and that was all offense. That defense didn't have anything to do with that Jake Browning run. Defense was a big problem last year.
All right. Anything else, Jay, on your lists, on your rankings? Anything else that I'm forgetting on today's PFN Bengals episode? We've got mini camp coming up next week. You know, you were at Logan Wilson's softball game this past weekend, Jay. Any good stories from that event, or any good sights and sounds from this weekend's softball game?
Yeah. Well, before I get to those, I do want to say that it's not just the Bengals all-time list. That Dallas has a lot of NFL wide lists that are up on Pro Football Network. And like, you think it's hard finding just the best of the best in a single franchise. I don't know how you go through the entire league and find these, but some really interesting ones. You know, best nicknames of all time, best game nicknames of all time. And then the standard ones, the top quarterbacks of all time. And a fun one, best draft day trades. I don't know how you pulled that one off, because there's a lot of draft day trades that have happened over the years. I would be interesting to see the worst ones, because I think Kajana Carter might be on that list. But so if you guys are interested in beyond the Bengals, there's some really interesting lists up on the site. And some Bengal fans might take exception with you because you didn't have the Freezer Bowl in the top 10 names, but the Ice Bowl was so similar to that, and you had that number 2?
I had number 2, yeah, and there were just so many good stories that came out of the Ice Bowl.
Yeah.
The referees couldn't use their whistles. The skin was ripping off their lips. You know, we got the University of Wisconsin banned or going to the hospital for hypothermia because it's so cold. But it was too similar. I think it was too similar to that one where I didn't want to list it. But other than that, it would have been in there. Absolutely.
And it has more national, like the Freezer Bowl is just lore. It's in Cincinnati. It's the deal. And I don't know how much people talk about it outside of Cincinnati. And it was a cool game. I was there. I was a freshman in high school, and
Were you really?
Oh yeah, I was.
Oh, we never talked about this. Yeah, I didn't know that.
The game wasn't bad at all. It was a drive home when I thawed out. It was the worst pain I've ever been in my life. It was awful. And then I went and soaked in a warm tub and missed most of the Cowboys 49ers game. I did get out of the tub in time to see the catch, but yeah, it was an exciting day, and it was a memorable day. And I was cold, but I wasn't as cold as you would think you would be in that weather. But I got numb, and then driving home, not riding home. I was only 15. I wasn't driving. I was in the car. But going to the Logan Wilson softball thing, just a really fun day. I would suggest that, people that missed it this year, go next year. You will have a blast, and you will donate money to a really good cause. The money goes to Logan Wilson's high school coach, lost his firstborn to sudden infant death syndrome. So this money goes to that charity. And it's fun to watch these guys who are the elite of the elite football players go out there and look like average Joe. Not even average, worse than average Joes. Like average Joes could probably beat the Bengals in softball. Maybe not the home run derby. Those guys were killing those balls, but their swings look awkward. Their throws look awkward. Some of them didn't even know the rules. They're thinking all they had to do is tag the base when they had to tag the runner on plays that weren't force out. So it was really fun to watch. It was great to catch up with Gio. He did say, I was taking video and I was so mad. I pulled the camera down, and then Mike Petraglia Trags asked him a question about if he left the Bengals and went elsewhere, but does he consider himself a Bengal all time? And he said, yeah. And he said the reason is that this year, and I didn't want to press him, but I hope everything's okay now. But he said his family's been through some really tough stuff this year, and the Bengals were the organization that reached out, and teammates reached out to see how he was doing and if they could help. And I thought that was really cool to hear that the Bengals. They take some knocks sometimes for how they treat former players, and that was good to hear. And then Andre Yoshivas saying he's never swung a bat in his life, and I don't understand how that's even possible. Not even once at a friend's birthday party, you'd go into the batting cages, and he said no, he ran track in the spring, and if he had any free time, he was at the beach. He was not playing baseball. So just a great day all around. Some really impressive plays. Evan McPherson hitting 3 home runs in the game, and I think he was runner-up in the home run derby. Was really surprising. He did look like an athlete out there. The way he fielded the ball in center field. And so again, if you get a chance to go next year, it is worth it. I know I think it was $15 for a lawn seat and $30 for the cheapest seat in the bowl, but the players are interacting with the fans. When you go to a minor league game and they have those goofy little on-field stuff between every inning, they did that, but they weren't bringing fans out of the stands to do it. The Bengals players themselves were doing it and putting themselves up for embarrassment in that way. So if you get a chance to go next year, I really would suggest going. It's a good time.
Great time, good cause, like Jay said, and it's good. The Bengals are not. It's good. They're devoting all their extra time to getting better at football. They're not trying to get out there, improve their baseball swing, and improve their softball technique. They're devoting everything to NFL. So that's good for Bengals fans, right? Jay, that's end of our episode. We'll be back next week talking about minicamp and any other Bengals news that comes out over this next week. Thanks everyone for listening. Make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube and give us a review on whatever podcast platform you are on. We will be back next week.